Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. This is a video that when I woke up this morning I didn't expect to make, and yet here we are because something urgent has come up. It is so urgent that I have literally cleared my schedule for the entire morning and early afternoon just to be able to sit in front of this camera and get this done. You absolutely need to hear what I have to say. You know that I'm not a fearmonger. I have no history of that in our channel, and I don't like spreading fear. Having said that, this is a video you're really going to need to pay attention to. Before I get started with what I have to say here today, if you want to respond directly to us, please in the comment section, absolutely do that. But if you want to speak directly to us, by all means, join us on our Sunday meetings on Patreon. They're in the evening Germany time, during the afternoon in the US. But you can speak to us directly, share your opinions, ask questions, hear other people's questions and answers, but it's a way to get directly involved in what we're doing, and it also gives you the opportunity to support the channel. And if you do like what we're doing and you want to support us, please join us on the Patreon meetings. The really short version of what I'm going to say is this. An executive order was issued by the White House on July 24th, 2025 by President Donald Trump that is going to affect hundreds of thousands of people's lives in a way that has already been demonstrated to end up in human rights violations and also to end up ineffective. Before I directly address the executive order issued just a couple of days ago, I really want to give some context in history as well. Throughout history, and I'm going to go back to 1942, presidents have used executive orders to kind of bypass constitutional requirements of due process and to restrict the liberties of its own citizens, always in the excuse or always on the excuse or always with the excuse that it's for the general safety of the general public. In February 1942, Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which permitted, without due process, the civil commitment of over 120,000 Americans, not because they had committed crimes, not because they were suspected of committing crimes. These were American citizens of Japanese origin. The fear of the government was that these Japanese Americans would have split loyalty between Japan and the United States, and there was a fear that they would engage in spying for the Japanese government or even engage in acts of sabotage here in the United States. So it was just safer to lock up these men, women, and children throughout the duration of the war. Later, in the American courts, it was determined that, yeah, that was a gross violation of civil rights, and I think any European nation would determine that that's a human rights violation. I say that because now let's jump forward to the 1990s when Florida, not using an executive order, but using the legislative branch, they enacted the Ryce Act. It was the involuntary civil commitment of sexually violent predators.
The Ryce Act takes a look at violent sexual offenders in our state prisons. When those offenders are close to release date, attorneys and the Department of Corrections decide if the offender should be released from prison as scheduled or if the offender shows signs of reoffending. Prosecutor Bob Jagers tells me that if the offender is thought to reoffend, the offender is moved to a specialized sexual predator facility. Now, the attorney did tell us there are about 800 violent sexual offenders in that facility. And he told us we asked how long do they end up staying there. He said some could stay a few years, some it could end up being a lifetime.
Even though this was a gross civil rights violation, and even though European courts have already held that these involuntary civil commitment of sex offenders acts are in fact human rights violations, these issues went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, the challenges. And the United States Supreme Court said, yeah, I mean, we're talking about sex offenders and there's a legitimate interest in protecting the public against these predators who are supposedly the worst of the worst. And so it is legal to civilly commit them with due process protections, so long as this program remains administrative in nature and not punitive. Now, I'm not going to talk about the mountains of evidence that show that this is in fact punitive. Most of these programs are run by departments of corrections and not by actual mental health facilities or mental health companies. Putting all that aside, The question is, here we are nearly 30 years later. We have plenty of empirical data. The question is, has the civil commitment of sexually violent predators done anything to reduce the rate of sex offenses in Florida? And the answer is no. And I'm not cherry picking data. I'm pulling my data directly from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And if you look at the charts that are going to pop up on the screen right now, you're going to see the Jimmy Ryce Act has had no noticeable effect on the rate of sex offenses committed in Florida in the following 30 years. This would also be true in all of the other 50 states. I'm just not going to bore you with those statistics because that's not the focus of this video. What I do want to focus on just on short term is that once again, we had a program where we involuntarily civilly committed people in the name of public safety that had negligible or no impact on public safety. That brings us to the executive order issued on July 24th, 2025 by President Donald Trump. You'll notice at the beginning of this video, I referred to Democratic President Roosevelt, who issued an executive order very similar to the one I'm about to discuss. And now I'm going to say that Donald Trump is a Republican. So it doesn't matter to me if it's a Democrat or Republican. This is not a one party or the other issue, generally speaking. So I'm not picking on the Republicans and I'm not picking on Donald Trump. My personal opinions about Donald Trump are completely irrelevant to discussing this particular executive order, which was just issued. This executive order is encouraging, is advocating, is pushing for the involuntary civil commitment of homeless people. I'm not joking. I am literally not joking. When I read the body of this executive order, it specifically wants to, encourages, and is providing money for the involuntary civil commitment of homeless people and or drug addicts. Now, I didn't say anything about these people have committed crimes. I have not said that. And I've not said that there's any legislation to actually enforce this. This is an executive order directing the different departments within the government to make this happen, irrespective of the courts. And I find this very frightening. Let me read some sections. Under Section 1, Donald Trump wrote, shifting homeless individuals into long-term institutional settings for humane treatment through the appropriate use of civil commitment will restore public order. So apparently homeless people are out there disrupting public order. In some cases, that does happen. In those cases, these folks are arrested for truancy, vagrancy, public disturbance, what have you. There are specific statutes that allow them to be arrested and temporarily housed in correctional facilities. Trump wants to go beyond that. He wants to create actual commitment centers where these folks are going to be housed. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, you'll notice that this has not been picked up by the general media. I have not seen anything online about this, which arguably means we're the first ones to do it. Under Section 2, Paragraph 1, the Secretary of Health and Human Services is to seek the reversal of judicial precedents and the termination of consent decrees that impede the United States policy of encouraging civil commitment of individuals with mental illness who pose risks to themselves or the public or are living on the streets and cannot care for themselves in appropriate facilities for appropriate periods of time. Now, they didn't ask the Department of Justice to go into court and seek civil commitment. He is directing the Secretary of Health and Human Services. It gets a little worse than that. Under Section 2, Paragraph 2, he is pushing for the identification, adoption, and implementation of maximally flexible civil commitment. That's unambiguous. That is a quote. Continuing under Section 3, the Attorney General, which, okay, now we're drawing in the Department of Justice. The Attorney General shall take immediate steps to assess the discretionary grant programs and determine whether priority for those grants may be given to grantees. That is 100% happening. This is not theory. This grant money is already being given out. In the very near future, you're going to hear about a detention facility being built near or on Fort Bliss, Texas. That's near El Paso, Texas, by the way, near the Mexican border. Continuing under Section 3, The Attorney General shall enforce and, where necessary, adopt standards that address individuals who are a danger to themselves or others and suffer from serious mental illness or substance abuse disorder, or who are living on the streets and cannot care for themselves. There's nothing here about people who have committed crimes, because the or means it doesn't just have to be someone suffering from mental illness. It can be someone who's suffering from substance abuse disorder. It can be someone who is living on the streets and cannot care for themselves. So I don't know who would actually enforce this, if it would be the local police or the FBI or ICE. I don't know. But they're going to be allowed to literally snatch people off the street. Homeless people sleeping on the street will now be, what do I use? The word arrested? Certainly I'll use the word detained and locked up in these civil commitment facilities. I will finish that paragraph by jumping to this one sentence that says that it needs to be done to the maximum extent permitted by law. Continuing under Section 3, Paragraph B, Section 1, Subparagraph 1, the Attorney General shall ensure that homeless individuals arrested for federal crimes are evaluated consistent with 18 U.S.C. 4248 to determine whether they are sexually dangerous persons and certified accordingly for civil commitment. So now if you are arrested for any federal crime, Donald Trump did not write arrested for sexual offenses under the federal crimes. No. Arrested for federal crimes, for any crime. This frightens me because while on the surface you would think that that we could interpret this to mean anybody arrested for sexual offenses under federal statutes or laws would be evaluated for civil commitment as a sexually violent predator. No. It did say for any crime. Florida did the exact same thing. Under its Sexual Violent Predators Commitment Act, it says that anybody can be detained under this law, not just for sex offenses, but for any offense which could reasonably be deemed to have been sexually motivated. Well, that's any crime. If I break into a house and commit burglary because I intend to steal something, if I intended to use that object to insert in my anus, God forbid, that would be a sexually motivated crime, even though I'm convicted of burglary. I didn't touch anybody. There is no crime because under Florida law, it's sexually motivated if there is a component of sexual gratification. It doesn't require a victim at all. Continuing, I'm going to jump down a little bit to subparagraph 2, which talks about encampment removal efforts. So under this executive order, the Trump administration wants to break up these sex offender or homeless encampment areas. Now, you already know, I don't think it's much of a secret, that there are tens of thousands of sex offenders who are having to live in small communities out in the forest, under trees, under bridges, because the residency restrictions will not allow them to live inside of the town or the city. There's also that situation where they cannot get jobs to pay for rent. Nobody wants to hire, well, I don't want to say nobody, but most companies don't want to hire sex offenders, so they can't pay for their own rent. They end up living in these encampments. Under this executive order, sex offender encampments, homeless encampments, encampments that might have drug use going on, they can now be broken up. Those people detained and put into civil detention commitment facilities. You ever come across this in history before? Did you ever hear about something like this in history class? Okay, so I'm going to jump down to Section 5, Paragraph D. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development shall take appropriate measures and revise regulations as necessary to allow, where permissible under applicable law, federally funded programs to exclusively house women and children and to stop sex offenders who receive homelessness assistance through such programs from being housed with unrelated children. So we suddenly went from homeless people are a threat to the community, to public safety, they're destroying our cities, to we need to start looking to see if any of these people are sex offenders, to now we're directly addressing sex offenders. This is all over the place. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, that's fascinating because as far as I understand, sex offenders are statutorily prohibited from receiving homeless housing assistance funds. As far as I know, sex offenders are not allowed to live in federal housing projects. It is already prohibited for them to be living with children that are not their own. So Why was this paragraph put in here? Fear-mongering. That's all it is. It's fear-mongering because this particular paragraph means absolutely nothing because it doesn't, in the real world, it doesn't have any effect. Continuing with section 5, I'm going to jump down to paragraph E, subparagraphs 1 and 2. What these paragraphs allow and demand is for the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development to obtain health-related information to the people who are detained under this program, and they are required to share that health-related information with law enforcement. If that's not a gross violation of HIPAA, I cannot imagine one. But what this reminds me of is going back to my home state, Florida, with their Ryce Act, their Involuntary Civil Commitment of Sexually Violent Predators Act. They did something similar there. In that, the law allows for all mental health records and health records to be unsealed. They are no longer protected under privilege, and they can be provided to the court, to the prosecutors, to the jury. Those of you who are regular viewers of this channel are going to remember that I have been in an involuntary civil commitment facility before. That was in 1999 at the end of my prison sentence. I escaped from that facility using a helicopter. I was captured, rather dramatically, spent 10 years in isolation as an escape risk before being released back into the community. And it's important to note that a jury eventually determined that I was not a sexually violent predator, that I was not supposed to be confined under that law. So much did I believe that my human rights had been violated that I fled to Europe after my parole was finished, came here legally, and I sought the protection of the German government. Well, the German government granted me that protection, and several European courts have already determined that these involuntary civil commitment laws, as I think I mentioned a moment ago, are in fact human rights violations. Nonetheless, when I was going through the involuntary civil commitment procedure, the court, using that law, unsealed my mental health records from when I was a teenager, when my parents had sent me to a therapist to try to fix me for being gay. So what I told a therapist when I was 15 as a juvenile, or 16, however old I was, and what I thought was being held in confidence, years later was simply unsealed with a stroke of a pen. So no, there is no mental health privacy privilege in the United States. There is no health privilege protections. And now we see that even HIPAA can be violated by this executive order. So as far as I know, we're the first channel to report on this, but please don't take my word for it. Please go on the internet right now and look up Executive Order, President Donald Trump, July 24th, 2025, and read to your heart's content. You can verify everything I've just said. I absolutely want to hear from you in the comment section. We read all the comments. We may not be able to respond to all of them, but we absolutely read them. And please join us at our Sunday meetings on Patreon to discuss this, because this will be the hot topic. Hopefully you found this informative. Hopefully you're moved to action by this, as I am. I am not satisfied with this. And I say all the time, we want the facts, not the fear. I don't want to be a fearmonger. I'm trying to simply give you the facts. Go look this up for yourselves, do your own research, and then question why this is not being covered by the general media. Until next time, my friends, be smart, stay inquisitive, and don't give in to the fear. Tschüss.